So a friend of mine sent me over some tracks to edit. And I had an idea of something to do with them. So I was thinking what we could do is I can kind of demonstrate how compression works. But, this is actually more Jameco stuff. Some more stuff to make synths out of, or electronic noise makers. We don't need that. He sent me over some tracks to mix. One of the main things that you would do in a mix would you utilize compression. And a few people have actually asked me about how compression works, and more specifically, like how do you make vocals sound good in a track? And I mean, there's a number of different things to make vocals sound good. You might think, mic choice would be number one. Really, a lot of it comes down to the interface. And then on top of that is to get a really decent, good, if you can afford it, preamp. What really matters is that preamp right there. That is what gets you that great sounds, not necessarily the microphones. And while they'll give you different kind of qualities to your vocals, going out and buying a Neumann without having a great preamp or a great interface will be kind of a waste of money. So I'd say start with the preamp on obviously a decent interface. One big thing that you kind of want to look at when you're working with vocals is compression. And compression is useful across the board for anything. Pretty much every track has some sort of compression on it. Not always, but a lot of time. And your master, that's compressed. And usually it's compressed nowadays to the point where it's basically what they call a brick wall. What that is when you look at the waveform and it just looks like a solid block. There's no dynamic range whatsoever. And that's what a compressor does, is it takes that dynamic range out. You're supposed to use it just to take out unwanted dynamic range. Here, let me show you. Okay, picture this as a left channel waveform. In the waveform, you'll see there are two peaks that go about 2 or above 0 dB. One in the middle is around, we'll say, -5 dB. The point of compression is to bring down the high points. The reason why you'd bring down all these high points is so that you can have a smoother audio level. This is great for vocals, guitar, anything that has dynamics in it. That is, parts go very loud while other parts are very soft. You want to kind of bring those together. Audio compression at its core has 4 main components: threshold, ratio, attack release, and a soft and hard knee. Threshold is the decibel at which the compressor starts compressing. Most modern day plugins look similar to this. You have your threshold in the middle. Up here is 0 dB, the max volume. Down here is something like -160 dB. In other words, it's not audible. The diagonal line is your dB, or volume. This threshold will slide up and down the volume line, representing the volume at which you want your compressor to start working. Let's say that this is -5 dB. The ratio determines how much the volume is lowered. 1:1 means that the volume does not change at all. If your ratio is 2:1, it's reduced half as much as the excess. That is, if your input volume is 2 dB, your output would be 1 dB. Infinity to 1 means your output never exceeds the threshold. So if your threshold is -5 dB, your output would be -5 dB. The main takeaway point here is that the higher the ratio, the more the volume gets reduced. Another key component to most compressors is the attack and release controls. The attack controls how quickly the volume is reduced once it hits its threshold. The release controls how fast the volume returns to the input level when the signal is no longer above the threshold. Many compressors have what's called a soft knee and a hard knee. Enabling the soft knee means as the volume reaches the threshold, the signal will be lowered slightly and at a lower ratio until it passes the threshold, at which point the signal will be lowered at full ratio. With a hard knee, the compressor will trigger exactly at the threshold. The differences tend to be very subtle. So I hope that kind of explains how a compressor works. Oh yeah. So this is Jay from the future. I was going through the footage and I realized it really wasn't clear. So I'm just adding this on right here. There's so much material out there. I was browsing through a lot before making this video, and a lot of it is really confusing. So hopefully this kind of gives you a better idea of like how a compressor works. It's a very basic understanding, but it's the core element that will get you started with understanding compression at a much higher level. I know there are a ton of different types of compressors. There's multi-band compressors, tube and opto, all sorts of other crazy things out there. It's more about the tone at that point. All of them have different kind of options, but when you really boil it down, those four elements are going to be in there, and if you understand those, you'll probably be able to understand the rest of it. As far as those tracks go, I did mix them, and they sound great. Leave a comment. Let me know if you want to see how I mixed the tracks that my friend sent me. And on that note, have a great night.